The drive from Fairhaven Cemetery to my daughter's house in the Berkshires takes about 90 minutes on a clear day. That Thanksgiving afternoon, with the first real snow of the season coming down in fat, slow flakes, it took me almost 3 hours. I'd lost track of time at Marlena's grave. That's the truth of it. I sat on the cold stone bench they'd installed near the willow tree last spring, and I told my wife about her granddaughter's piano recital, about the leak in the upstairs bathroom I finally fixed myself, about how I'd been sleeping better lately. She'd been gone 4 years that November, and some days I still talked to her like she was just in the next room. By the time I pulled into the long gravel driveway of my daughter's place, the sky had gone that deep navy blue that comes early in late autumn. Every window in the big colonial was lit up warm and yellow. I could see shapes moving behind the curtains. The dining room. They were all ready at the table. I sat in the car for a moment, gathering myself. I had a bottle of small batch bourbon on the passenger seat, the kind my son-in-law had mentioned wanting back in October, a pearl necklace for my daughter that had belonged to her grandmother, a leather-bound sketchbook for my grandson, who was 17 and obsessed with architecture. I'd wrapped them all myself the night before, slowly, the way Marlena used to teach me, with the corners folded just so. The walkway hadn't been shoveled. I noted that, but it didn't bother me. I climbed the porch steps carefully, holding the bag of gifts against my chest with one hand and steadying myself on the railing with the other. My knee had been giving me trouble since September. I rang the bell, but no one came. I could hear them inside, plates clinking, voices rising and falling, so I tried the door. It was unlocked. I stepped into the foyer and was about to call out when I heard my son-in-law's voice, loud and confident the way it always was when he'd had 2 drinks. "You know what I'm grateful for this year," he was saying. There was scattered laughter. "I'm grateful that the old goat finally took the hint. 3 hours late and counting. Maybe this is the year he just doesn't show up at all. Wouldn't that be something to give thanks for?" The laughter that followed wasn't scattered. It was full and warm and rolling, and the loudest voice in it, the one I'd know in any room, in any country, in any lifetime, was my daughter's. I stood there in the foyer with the bag of gifts pressed against my chest. The house smelled like roasted turkey and rosemary and wood smoke. Real things. Good things. I could see myself in the hallway mirror, an old man in a wool coat, with snow still on his shoulders, holding presents. I didn't make a sound. I turned around. I pulled the door shut behind me with my fingertips so the latch caught soft. I walked back down the unshoveled steps. I got in my car. I drove away. I want to be clear about something. I didn't cry. I didn't scream into the steering wheel. I didn't even feel angry, not exactly. What I felt, sitting at the red light at the bottom of their road, was something quieter and more precise than anger. It was the feeling of finally seeing something that had been there a long time. I drove to a roadside diner about 20 miles south, the kind of place that stays open on holidays for truckers and lonely people. I ordered coffee and a slice of pumpkin pie. The waitress was a woman about my age with kind eyes, and she didn't ask any questions when I sat there for almost an hour without touching the pie. I called my attorney from the booth. I didn't expect her to answer on Thanksgiving evening, but Priscilla Brackenridge had been my attorney for 31 years. She picked up on the second ring. "Tell me what's wrong," she said. I told her. Not all of it. Just the relevant pieces. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the reasons I'd kept her all those years. When I finished, there was a long silence on her end. "Friday morning," she said finally. 8 o'clock, my office. "Don't do anything tonight. Don't send any messages. Don't make any calls to your daughter. Drive home, eat something hot, and sleep if you can." I did exactly what she said. I drove the 4 hours back to my house in Connecticut. I made myself a grilled cheese at 1 in the morning standing at the counter. I didn't sleep, but I lay down, and that was enough. My phone started buzzing around 9 the next morning. My daughter. "Dad, Where were you? We waited. Aunt Penelope brought that walnut salad you like. I let it go to voicemail. She left 3 more messages over the next 2 hours, each one a little more confused, a little less performative. By the 4th one, she was asking if I was okay, if I needed her to come over. I didn't respond. At 8 Friday morning, I was in Priscilla's office with a thermos of coffee and a folder I'd assembled overnight. I'd been sleepless and methodical, the way I used to be on the night before a difficult job back when I ran my construction firm. I had statements, contracts, transfer records, everything labeled. Here's what people do not understand about me. They look at me, this quiet old man with calloused hands and a soft voice, and they think soft means weak. My daughter's husband had thought that for 9 years. My daughter, I was beginning to realize, had perhaps thought it for longer. But I had built a company from 1 truck and a borrowed welder. I had put 2 children through college, supported a wife through cancer treatment that didn't work, and bought back my own father's foreclosed home so my mother could die in the bedroom where she'd raised her family. I am not soft. I am simply quiet about it. Priscilla and I worked through the morning. By lunchtime, we had a list. The mortgage. I had been paying my daughter and her husband's mortgage for 6 years. It was not a loan. It was not a gift. It was, technically, an arrangement that had begun the year my son-in-law lost his job at the brokerage, and my daughter, 8 months pregnant with my granddaughter, had called me sobbing. I had stepped in, and I had simply never stepped back out. 6 years, and roughly $400,000 later, I was still cutting that check on the 1st of every month. My son-in-law had gotten a new job within 4 months. He'd been promoted twice since. They had 2 cars in the driveway worth more than my own. They had a swimming pool. And the thing was, I had never once asked them to start paying it themselves. I think I was waiting for them to offer. Here is the legal piece my son-in-law did not know. 6 years ago, when I'd taken over the payments, Priscilla had structured it so that I held a secured interest in the property. My name was not on the deed, but a lien against the home reflected the principal I'd paid down. They had signed it. They had not read it carefully. My son-in-law in particular had been in such a hurry to take the lifeline that he'd skimmed past the part where I had the right to call in the principal at any time, with 60 days written notice. The college fund. My granddaughter, Marlena's namesake, was 8 years old. I had funded her 529 plan from the day she was born. It now contained roughly $210,000. The account was in my name, with her listed as beneficiary. I could change that beneficiary. I could close the account. The trust. Marlena and I had set up a family trust before her diagnosis. After she passed, I had become sole trustee. The trust held a substantial portion of my retirement, the proceeds from selling my company, and various investments. My daughter and son were the named successor beneficiaries with provisions for grandchildren. As trustee, I had broad discretion. The will. Standard. Everything to the children, with carve-outs for grandchildren. Drafted 12 years ago when my biggest concern was making sure Marlena would be taken care of if I went first. We worked. Priscilla drafted. I signed. By 3 in the afternoon, I had served formal 60-day notice on my daughter and son-in-law by certified mail that I was calling in the principal on the secured loan and ceasing the monthly mortgage contribution effective January 1st. I had transferred the 529 funds into a new account that named only my grandson, Marlena's brother's child, as beneficiary. I had revised the trust to remove my daughter as a successor beneficiary entirely, replacing her with a charitable remainder structure that would benefit a vocational training scholarship for kids aging out of foster care. My grandson and granddaughter remained beneficiaries, but with conditions, and I drafted a new will that mirrored the trust. I did one more thing. I had Priscilla send a separate letter, addressed only to my son-in-law, requesting reimbursement of $43,000 in personal expenses I had covered for him directly over the years. The down payment on his Audi. The deposit on their swimming pool. The Caribbean cruise he'd taken my daughter on for their anniversary, which he had charged to my American Express because his card was, he'd claimed at the time, having a security flag. I had records of all of it. When I left Priscilla's office at 4:30, the sun was already setting. I drove home through that violet light, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt awake. The certified letters arrived at my daughter's house on Tuesday. My phone exploded. I did not answer. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black tea, and I watched the screen light up over and over. My daughter, my son-in-law, my daughter again, my daughter's number from a different phone, a number I didn't recognize. Then my son's number, my daughter's older brother, who lived in Oregon and rarely got involved in anything. I answered when my son called. "Dad, what is going on? Caroline just called me hysterical. She says you're cutting her off. She says you're cutting her off. She says you didn't come to Thanksgiving. She says her husband is having a panic attack." I told my son the truth. The whole truth this time, including the toast. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry," I said. "It's not your sorry," I said. "It's not. You're sorry to give. What do you want me to do?" "Nothing," I said. "Live your life. Love your wife. Raise that boy. That's all I want from you. That's all I've ever wanted." He was crying a little when we hung up. My son was always the soft one. He got that from his mother. The voicemails from my daughter shifted over the course of the week. The first ones were panicked and demanding. By Wednesday, they were apologetic in that performative way she had, the way she used to apologize as a teenager when she'd been caught lying. By Friday, they were tearful. Saturday, they were angry. Sunday, they were angry. Sunday, they were tearful again. I listened to them all. I did not return any of them. On the following Monday, my son-in-law sent me a 6-page email. It began with a long preamble about how much he respected me, how much he had always considered me a father figure, how the comments I'd apparently overheard had been taken wildly out of context and were the result of stress and too much wine. He explained that he had not meant the old goat thing about me at all. He had meant it about an elderly relative of his, whom he'd been forced to host the previous weekend. He insisted that anyone who knew him would understand this immediately. He also informed me that the lien I was calling in was, in his understanding, potentially unenforceable given certain irregularities in the original documentation. He suggested we meet to discuss a more reasonable path forward as a family. I forwarded the email to Priscilla without comment. She forwarded it back 20 minutes later with a one-line response. Let him try. He did not try. I learned later that he had taken the documents to a real estate attorney in his town who had charged him $800 to tell him that the lien was airtight, the notice was procedurally perfect, and that fighting in court would cost more than the principal he owed and he would lose anyway. The mortgage was roughly $11,000 a month. The principal I was calling in was just under $300,000 after accounting for the equity they'd technically built. They had 60 days. They did not have $60,000 in liquid savings, let alone $300,000. Their lifestyle had eaten everything. The cars, the pool, the renovations, the vacations. My daughter had stopped working 3 years earlier. My son-in-law made good money, but not $300,000 in cash kind of money. What they had to do was put the house on the market, in the Berkshires, in December, in a buyer's market. Christmas came and went. I did not go to my daughter's house, and she did not invite me. I drove to my son's place in Oregon and spent 10 days with him and his wife and my grandson. My grandson, who was a junior in high school and beginning to think about college, sat with me one evening on the back deck while the rain came down in that gray Oregon way and asked me if I was okay. I told him I was. I told him the story, because he was old enough, and because I did not want him to hear a version of it from anyone else. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Granddad, that's not revenge. That's just the bill coming due." I have thought about that sentence many times since. From a 17-year-old. The bill coming due. In late January, my granddaughter called me. My daughter had given her my number, or perhaps she'd had it already. She was 8 years old. She wanted to know if I was angry at her. I told her no. I told her I loved her more than the moon and stars. I told her that grown-ups have grown-up problems sometimes, and that none of it was about her, ever. She asked if I would come see her. Soon, I said. I'll come see you soon, sweetheart. I drove up the next weekend. My daughter answered the door and her face was a mess of emotions. None of them performed this time, and I think she might have hugged me if I had given her the slightest opening. I did not give her the opening. I asked if I could take my granddaughter to the diner down the road for pancakes. We sat in a vinyl booth and she ate chocolate chip pancakes the size of her face, and she told me about school and a fight with her best friend, and a book she was reading about a girl who tames a dragon. I listened. I asked questions. I did not bring up her parents. When I drove her home, my son-in-law was standing in the driveway. He'd lost weight. His face had that hollow quality that comes from not sleeping. He raised a hand as I pulled up. I rolled down my window. "Could we talk?" he said. "Just for a minute, please." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I told my granddaughter to run inside and tell her mother, thank you for letting her come, and I'd see her again soon. When she was gone, I rolled my window up halfway. I did not get out of the car. "I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one, not the email." All right. What I said at Thanksgiving was indefensible. I was drunk and stupid and resentful, and I said something unforgivable about a man who has done nothing but support my family for 9 years. I am ashamed of myself. I have been ashamed every day since. All right. I'm not asking you to undo what you did. I understand. I know I earned this, but I'm asking, please. If there's any version of this where my daughter doesn't lose her home, I'm asking you to consider it. I sat there in the running car with the heater going. I looked at him. I thought about the toast. I thought about the toast. I thought about my daughter's voice rising above all the others. Your daughter isn't going to lose her home, I said. You are. Those aren't the same thing. He nodded slowly. He was looking at his shoes. I want to ask you something, I said. And I want you to answer honestly, because it doesn't change anything either way. Okay. How long have you and my daughter felt that way about me? He was quiet for a long time. He looked up at the bare trees over the driveway. I don't know, he said. It crept in. I don't know when. That's the answer I expected, I said. And I rolled up the window and I drove away. The house went on the market in February. It sold in April for less than they'd hoped. After paying the principal and the brokerage fees and the moving costs, my daughter and son-in-law walked away with about $37,000 and no permanent address. They moved into a rental 40 minutes from where they'd been. My daughter went back to work, part-time at first, then full-time. My son-in-law sold the Audi. I continued to see my granddaughter every few weeks. I picked her up. I took her to the diner. I took her to the children's museum. I took her to the children's museum. I took her ice skating once. We did not talk about her parents, and I did not poison her against them. They were her parents. They would always be her parents. That was hers, not mine. In the summer, my daughter sent me a letter. A real letter, on paper, in an envelope with a stamp. It was 4 pages long. She apologized. She did not make excuses. She did not ask me to change the trust or the will. She did not ask me for anything. She just told me what she had been thinking about for the last 7 months, and what she had come to understand about herself, and what she wanted to do differently, regardless of whether I ever spoke to her again. I read the letter twice. Then I put it in a drawer. I did not reply for a long time, months. When I finally did, I wrote her a short note. I said I had received her letter. I said I appreciated the honesty of it. I said I was not ready to have a relationship with her yet, but I was not closed to the possibility, eventually. I said I loved my granddaughter. I said I would always be present in my granddaughter's life, and that I wanted my daughter to know that, so she would not worry about it. That was all. It has been almost a year and a half now since that Thanksgiving. My daughter and I are not estranged, but we are not what we were either, which is fine, because what we were was not what I'd thought it was anyway. The trust still names my grandson and granddaughter as beneficiaries. The vocational scholarship for foster kids has funded its first 6 recipients, and I have met 3 of them. They sent me cards at Christmas. Real handwritten ones. I changed one thing in the trust last spring. I added a provision that my daughter could become a beneficiary again, but only of a small portion, and only if she completed a specific set of conditions involving counseling and financial education, both of which she would have to verify to Priscilla. I did not tell my daughter about this provision. I do not know if I ever will. It is there if she earns it. It is there if she doesn't. The point was not to make her chase it. The point was that I had stopped being so angry that I could not imagine, somewhere in the future, being something other than angry. People in my life ask me sometimes if I regret it. The Thanksgiving thing. The way I handled it. The way I didn't shout, didn't fight, didn't give them the catharsis of an argument. The way I just turned around and walked away and let the paperwork do the speaking. I tell them no. I tell them this. There is a kind of love that gives and gives and gives, and there is a kind of love that says, what you have done is not acceptable, and I will not continue to fund the life in which you do it. I think people confuse the second kind for absence of love. It isn't. It is love that is finally remembered. It has a spine. My wife used to say that the best thing about me was that I was patient. I think about that sometimes now. I think she was right. I think I was patient for 68 years, and then, one cold November evening in a foyer that smelled like rosemary and wood smoke, with snow still on my shoulders and a bag of carefully wrapped gifts pressed against my chest, I was, very calmly, done being patient. That's the whole story. That's all of it. I have thought about that Thanksgiving evening more times than I can count. The drive back through the snow. The diner with the kind waitress. The phone call to Priscilla in the booth where my pumpkin pie sat untouched. And what I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened to my daughter and her husband was something I did to them. It was something they had been doing to themselves for 9 years, and I had simply been the cushion that absorbed the impact. When I stepped aside, they fell. That isn't cruelty. That's gravity. I think about the fact that my son-in-law had been promoted twice in the years I was paying his mortgage. I think about the Audi and the swimming pool and the Caribbean cruise. None of those things were my fault. None of those things were even my decision. I think about how my daughter, the girl I taught to ride a bike on a quiet street in 1989, had stood in her own dining room and laughed loudest when a man called her father an old goat. And I think about how that laugh did not appear out of thin air. It had been growing in her slowly for years, and I had been so afraid of seeing it that I had paid not to. The lesson I keep returning to is not about revenge, because what I did was not revenge. Revenge wants the other person to suffer. I did not want my daughter to suffer. I simply wanted to stop financing a version of myself that they had decided was disposable. There is a difference, and it matters. What I would tell anyone my age, anyone who has spent a lifetime giving and is starting to wonder if they are being mistaken for a fountain, is this. Generosity without dignity is not generosity. It is fear wearing a friendly coat. Real love can say no. Real love can call in a debt. Real love can call in a debt. Real love can let a grown child face the consequences of a life she chose, because shielding her from those consequences was never love in the first place. It was a kind of bribe to keep being included. I am 68 years old. My wife is gone. My knees ache when it rains. I do not have endless years left to figure out who I am, and I refuse to spend the ones I do have being a checkbook with a pulse. I owed it to Marlena. I owed it to my grandson who needs to grow up watching a man who knows his own worth. I owed it to my granddaughter, who will one day be a woman, and who deserves to know that her grandfather did not fold when he was disrespected. And I owed it, finally, to the boy I once was, who built a company out of one truck and a borrowed welder, and who never imagined he would forget how to stand up straight. A spine, it turns out, is not a thing you lose. It is a thing you remember you always had.